morning, everyone, and welcome to Monday Night Travel with Rick Steves Europe. My name is Julianne Worden, and I will be your moderator this evening as we travel along with Rick and our guest, Cameron Hewitt. Tonight, we're learning what it's like to travel during the pandemic, as we'll hear about both Cameron and Rick's trips to Europe in the last couple months. And now, without further ado, I'll turn things over to Rick Steves, who will be one of our tour guides this evening. Hi, Rick.
Hey, Julianne, thank you so much for the introduction. And I'm wearing my mask right now because this is a special edition of Monday Night Travel. We're not going to be visiting a certain place and dreaming about going to that certain place. We're going to be sorting through all the complexities and the confusion and the tips and the practicalities of traveling during this pandemic. And this mask is one of my very special tools because I've spent a month in Europe this fall on 2 different trips, and I've felt very safe traveling in Europe. So thank you for joining us. And it just occurred to me, there's a lot of anxiety. One of our rules in our tour department is handle people's anxiety, address the concern, straighten it out, have good information, and let people travel smartly. We don't want to be promoting travel during the pandemic. We want to be promoting people understanding what it takes to travel smartly and safely during the pandemic, and then you can make the choice yourself. And I'm going to do that now with my good friend and partner at Rick Steves Europe, Cameron Hewitt. Cameron is our content manager, and he's the most prolific travel writer that I think I've ever worked with. And Cameron, it's great to have you with you, and nice to see your mask there.
Thank you for having me, Rick. By the way, you're vaccinated, right?
Yes, I'm vaccinated.
I can take my mask off. Okay, good.
You
good.
can.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Rick and you and I both had wonderful trips this fall, and I think we both just came home buzzing with excitement, and we're really excited to share the message about how you can travel safely and responsibly during these sort of hopefully late pandemic times.
And it occurred to me, both of us were a little anxious before flying away because there was a lot of this chatter going, oh, I heard this. And, we decided because this is what we do, we wanted to be smart, get the information, don't be risky, but be diligent about traveling in an efficient way and find out what really is the story. And it occurred to me, between you and me, we've spent 2 months there this fall. What countries did you go to this fall, Cameron?
Yeah, I spent most of September in Slovenia, Italy, the Czech Republic, and Berlin, Germany.
And then I've been in Paris, hiking around Mount Blanc, Italy, and Athens. So between us, we've got some good experience. And we don't really want to say this evening, it's this way in Greece right now. We just want to say we've been in half of Europe. It's a moving thing. It's fluid. We are evolving. We don't know what the trajectory is. Things can go up and down, but we have a good sense of what it's like over there. And now we're going to share that. So basically, I'm going to show a few videos. I'm going to take people to Paris and around Mount Blanc, and then I'll turn it over to you and you'll take us through everywhere you went during COVID. And then we'll come back to me and I'll talk about the time I had teaching our tour guides the ropes in Italy and learning about how COVID is now for travelers in Italy, and then finishing off with Athens. And then something I think both of us are looking forward to is the Q&A time after we've had our chance to present.
And I will say, we're both going to mix in a lot of travel tips. We know what questions you have because we had the same questions before we took off for Europe. So we've designed both of our little presentations to try to anticipate a lot of your questions, but any that we don't get to, hopefully we can pick up in the Q&A.
Absolutely. And Lisa's in the Q&A section right now. She'll be answering your questions over the time. And then Lisa and Julianne will be organizing your questions. Cameron and I will get to them. But right now we're going to dive in. So thank you for joining us. Cameron, thank you for joining us, because between you and me, that gives us a critical mass of right up-to-date experience where I think we can let people know what is the story right now if you want to travel in Europe. And I think that right now I've got a couple of little video clips I'd like to share. And this is just to get us sort of in the mood. I was in Rome a couple of weeks ago on Piazza Navona. And it just occurred to me, hey, this is pretty normal. So I thought I would show you just a clip on Piazza Navona. And after that, we'll go to the Pantheon. And there's a great site that's doing a great job of making sure people that go in there are safe and they're going to stay healthy. So here we are now on the Piazza Navona in Rome just a couple weeks ago. And as I was there doing this clip, one of our fans from Monday Night Travel or our public television TV show or our guidebooks, he spied me and he's going to come over and interrupt me. Hey, I'm Rick Steves. Is travel back in Europe? I'm here on Piazza Navona in Rome on a beautiful afternoon, and I'll let you be the judge of that. So you can see that man right there. He spotted me with a little mask on his chin there, and he'll be over here in just a second. You know, it feels a lot like old times. A few masks, a few less people, just as much romance and magic. Happy travels.
My wife said,
Hey.
she really attacked me because I said I was going to come up and say, I'd recognize that purple shirt anywhere.
You got my purple shirt.
Yeah.
That's good, because we're right here on Piazza Navona. So that just occurred to me. It was quite normal, there was just a positive energy, and people were traveling smartly. They were vaccinated. They had their masks. Now I'm just a couple blocks away in the Pantheon, and I was impressed by how they were making sure nobody could go in without having their proof of vaccination and their temperature taken. And this is the story in the Pantheon. And I show this clip because I can think it's safe to say it's this way all across Europe when you go to the major crowded sites. Hey, I'm Rick Steves. I'm in Rome at the Pantheon, and I'm just checking the way things are working during the pandemic as people are more and more traveling. Here we have the health security line. And, there's a long line here of tourists that want to get in and see the Pantheon. And you have to show your CDC card or your green pass if you're a European. And they check that very carefully. And then you check your temperature. And that lets you know if you're healthy. And then, of course, there's a long line here. But the good news is you get to go into the Pantheon and it's almost empty. And to be alone in the Pantheon, that's an experience people haven't enjoyed for a long, long time. There's a positive energy. Things are opening up. And right now, the focus is on let's make sure everybody's got their vaccination, and let's make sure we can enjoy the wonders of Europe and be healthy at the same time. Happy travels from Rome. Okay, so there you see just a little candid snapshot of what it's like in Rome. And as I mentioned, I think you could count it on being that way just about anywhere you went in Europe. So right now, I'm going to take you on my trip around Mount Blanc and just share with you not the trip around Mount Blanc, but what the COVID concerns were there and what lessons I did learn from that experience. And this will just be a chance for me to talk about some of the things that we want to be mindful of. I was going with my girlfriend, Shelley, and you're on an airplane traveling from the United States over to Europe. It's the longest I've worn that mask ever, but get used to wearing that mask. I honestly feel quite safe on an airplane. I don't know why. I just feel safe on an airplane during COVID. You want to wear your mask. You can't get on the plane without having your proof of vaccination. And you need, at least when I went, you needed to have a negative test within 48 hours or 72 hours before you flew. So that's just a matter of being diligent and knowing what are the basic requirements. And I was just talking with Cameron. A lot of people find that, it frustrates them and something really goes haywire. I would think it's safe to say it's our fault if something goes haywire. You need to be proactive. You need to ask questions. You need to get things done before you go to the airport and give yourself a little extra time. And I felt it went very well. So we land in Europe and you just realize that you need to have your CDC card basically taped onto your passport. And every time you show your passport, you're going to want to be able to show your CDC card. You're going to hear Europeans talk about the green pass. You're going to hear people talk about, you can't get the French pass, the QR code, and so on. That may be the case, but everywhere I went, the CDC card was my ticket. And I never had a single second of hesitation when I tried to get into a museum or a restaurant or an airplane using my American CDC card. So I took 6 days to hike around Mont Blanc, and I'll tell you, it was just a vacation from COVID. I didn't hardly think about it up in the mountain. The hike around Mont Blanc is, I'm going to be talking about this in specifics in 2 weeks from tonight as I share the travel end of all of this. But it was a great opportunity just to get in nature. And for me, I didn't realize it, but I needed a vacation from all these pandemic concerns. And hiking and being in the great outdoors, it was a beautiful thing. And it was just good for all of our spirits and all of our souls. Met a lot of Americans. Half of the people on the trail were Americans. And that was a real surprise to me. I didn't realize how many Americans are traveling during the pandemic. And everybody I talked to was traveling well. You hear the odd case here and there, secondhand on social media or whatever. But when I was in Europe, the Americans I met were having a great time. And in a situation like this, they've got a few rudimentary COVID precautions, but basically you're on top of a mountain having a great lunch with a bunch of cool people, and you're not really thinking about COVID. Hiking around the mountain, anytime you would be in a town going to a nice restaurant, you'd have to show your CDC card before you could get into the restaurant. You'd wear your mask, and then you take the mask off when you sit down, and you don't need to wear the mask while you're eating. You have your own bubble with your own friends. And I think it's pretty safe to say when you're hanging out with travelers are people that I think embrace science. They don't politicize this pandemic, and they are vaccinated. You can't be a traveler and not be vaccinated these days. That's just kind of the way it's going. Just recently, we decided to require everybody on our tours next year to be vaccinated. And that's not a hardship for anybody who's trying to take our tour, because you can't fly to Europe. You can't get into the museums. You can't get into the restaurants unless you've got that vaccination. So we don't want to take people's money and have them standing out on the street while we have all the fun inside, those of us who are vaccinated. If you're going to travel, you need to be vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated, your world is going to get progressively smaller and smaller and smaller. Europeans are taking much more hard-hitting individual liberty abusing steps to make sure their populace is safe by having people strongly encouraged to get their vaccinations. And I'm sure Cameron will talk about that a little as we go forward. But on the hike, to get on the gondola, you just put on your mask. You can't get onto the gondola without a mask. To get on a public bus, even in the middle of nowhere in the mountains of France, you got to have your mask. And we just had a great time, I'll tell you. When the hike was done, then it got more serious, because now we're getting into the big train system. Now we're going to the big city, and there's a lot more COVID in Paris than there is in Chamonix, I'll promise you that. So we said goodbye to our hiking partners, and we got on the train, and I was impressed by the trains in France. You've got to have, there it says right there, a ticket, a mask, a COVID certificate. Those are the three things you need. And if you're an American, that means your CDC card. And then you're free to go on the train. But you cannot get on the train if you don't have that. And you need to wear your mask. I felt no politicization of masks anywhere in Europe. Of course, I've seen rallies, anti-vaxxer rallies in Europe. There was a big one in Florence when I was there. But Cameron, what did you feel about when it comes to people's sensibilities about wearing a mask?
In general, I saw extremely high sort of adoption of mask wearing. Almost everywhere that I went, I found that people were wearing masks inside, and then they take them off when they go outside. It's just, you put it on when you go in, into a restaurant, into a shop, into a train, into a subway system. You take it off when you get out. I also wanted to clarify, it's, just to be a little bit more precise, you don't necessarily have to have a COVID vaccination to do all these things. There are outs for people who can prove they recovered from COVID in 6 months, or that they've been tested recently. I agree with you, Rick, though. I think you should think about it effectively that you should be vaccinated. It's very complicated to jump through the hoops if you're anything other than vaccinated. So I think even though that's not strictly the case in some situations, you should assume that vaccination is the way to go.
I was kind of taking that leap, you're right. Thank you for the clarification. But I know when I was in France, the only long lines I saw were at the pharmacies, because they had to get their negative test, those anti-vaxxers, in order to go to work.
Yep.
So every 2 or 3 days, you got to go to the pharmacy and get a test so that you can go to work if you choose not to be vaccinated. So it's just kind of a tough love, I think, to make that leap and just say, essentially, if you're going to travel smartly in Europe, you need to be vaccinated. Conceivably, if you want to get tests every 48 hours, you could hobble around Europe that way, but I don't know why you would. In Paris, Shelley and I just had a great time. It was her first time in Paris, so we did all the touristy things. We hopped in an Uber. I have this thing I do in our guidebook of a floodlit tour of the Rome using an Uber, and we just made friends with our Uber driver. I used the Uber a lot in Athens and in Italy, and it's just like here. You wear your mask, and it just works the same. I was impressed by the normalcy, actually. We had a great time in Paris. I just took some snapshots of the energy and the positive feeling on the streets. Cameron, you know this street, this is Rue Claire, and it's got that ambiance that everybody likes. And I don't even see any masks there because you wear the mask when you go inside. And then when you sit down, you take the mask out. And a good part of living in Europe is outside these days anyways. They've got a lot of these streeteries in Europe. Restaurants, because of climate change, also are doing a lot more outside than inside. So, but on the metro in Paris, you wear your mask. And I think you'd get a lot of grief if you didn't wear your mask. People are all over it. I had people telling me you can't go into the Louvre if you're an American. They're screwing up. You can go into the Louvre if you're an American. You just need to have your CDC card. Here we have it right here. There's a tent set up. As you enter the Louvre, you can see the pyramid in the background there, and you line up. It's a 10-minute delay. I'm thankful for it because I can relax inside knowing everybody's vaccinated and people are wearing their masks. So this is having people's QR code checked, or they've got it on their phone. You can have a photograph of your CDC card in the phone, but I would certainly have the original of it in your money belt or in your wallet or in your purse or somewhere where you can get at it. When you're indoors, you generally are wearing a mask, unless you're sitting at a table eating or drinking. But if you're in a museum, just assume you're going to wear the mask the whole time. I have not been in a museum anywhere in Europe this year where you didn't wear a mask when you were inside. Crowds, there's a lot of crowds. But everybody in here is vaccinated or tested negative and is wearing a mask. So the crowds aren't really something that's going to threaten your health, really. But you can see the Mona Lisa. You don't need shoulder pads like you normally do, but there's still plenty of people packed around there to see Mona Lisa. A lot of Americans. This is the Orsay Gallery, just having a wonderful time. Here's the cafeteria in the Orsay. But again, back out on the street, you got the same energy that you had before. And Europe really lived through a much tighter lockdown than we can imagine. I mean, they spent months where they couldn't go out of their house except once a week to go to the grocery store and or to walk the dog. I mean, people who had a dog could rent out the dog to their friends so that those people had an excuse to get out and get some fresh air. But it was tough for people. Today, you sit in the street, you take off your mask, you have a nice time. My friend Laurent, in my favorite restaurant in Paris, even outside, he was diligently checking his clients' CDC cards or QR codes or green passes in order for them to sit there and have dinner. At hotels, when you go to breakfast, I noticed there was no consistency except that there were safeguards, but different restaurants, different breakfast rooms in different hotels in different countries all had a different way to have your sanitary pass figured out. In one hotel, you proved you were vaccinated, and then they gave you a sanitary pass, and you could come and go for the breakfast that way. I'll show you a few photographs of breakfast, but this was one on the Alpine hike where everything was behind glass, and you pointed, and they dished it up for you. This is very important here. When you are going to fly, you have to have a negative test within 48 or 72 hours. And I honestly don't know exactly the specifics, and I don't know if they are the same all over Europe or whatever, but I do know that you need to get a negative test. And Cameron, let's talk about that right now. I'm going to stop sharing and just so we can both be on the screen here. But this to me is the big deal. When you're flying within Europe, or when you're going to fly home, or when you're going to go to Europe, you need more than the vaccination card, don't you?
Absolutely. It depends on the country. So I was lucky. I didn't have to test to go to Europe. I was flying into Italy. 2 days after I landed, they started requiring a test. And then I flew within Europe, and it just so happened at that point, those two countries didn't require a test. Everyone has to require a test to enter has to take a test 72 hours before re-entering the United States, even if you're a US citizen, even if you're vaccinated. So I think that's the big thing that you're going to come across, at least until that changes. And then if you're crossing any borders within the trip, you have to check. I mean, Rick said this earlier. You have to do your homework to be traveling right now. You have to look up Do I need to do a test to go from this country to this country? Do I have to fill out a passenger locator form? We're going to talk about that a little bit later. What are exactly the guidelines for crossing borders? It's kind of a headache, kind of a hassle. If you're somebody who likes to be free and easy when you travel, maybe wait until that's more settled in. But yeah, testing is something that comes up a lot. And on the other hand, I think Europe has it really well figured out. They have a lot of really good solutions for testing.
And I'll show you a photograph of that later on, but a lot of people were kind of talking to the wrong people too far in advance to figure out their testing. The point is, if you've got airplanes flying across the Atlantic, there's going to be a way to get your test so you can get on the airplane and fly. I mean, if there's a demand, there will be a supply. That's just how it works. I mean, it's a new industry right now. They make $20, $30 every time they give a tourist a test. You can bet there's going to be little pharmacies that pop up that weren't there a year ago, making good money. What I found in every case was the people at the hotel, they know the story. And I don't want to know the story 2 weeks in advance. I want to know the story 4 days in advance. Then I can start thinking, oh, 72 hours before I fly or 72 hours before I land, or do the arithmetic, you got to get a negative test. And then how do you do it? Some people say you can go to the airport and get it. I don't want to mess with it at the airport. I want to get, what if I have a false positive? What if there's a long line? What if I misunderstand something and I'm all, it's just too stressful? I want to drop into a pharmacy 48 hours before. I did it in Paris. I did it in Athens. It cost me $20. It was a fun experience, believe it or not. Very friendly, very efficient. The information came from my hotel. And this is my pass from Athens, I believe, yeah. And they email you your test, but also you can print it out. They can give you a printout or you can print out the email. But I'm old fashioned. I don't want it digital on my phone. I want it here. This is my negative test. And it's just, they look at it and I'm on the plane. So get that done 48 hours in advance. And I think you're home free.
I agree with everything you said. I think people get stressed about having to test. I think that's kind of the new normal, at least for a while, as we move through this pandemic. We have a wonderful hotelier that Rick and I both love in Tuscany. My wife and I stayed with her a few weeks ago. And she put it so simply. She said, yeah, you have to take a test to come to Italy, but isn't it worth it to take a test for an hour to spend 2 weeks in the beautiful Tuscany, right? She said, test in, show your CDC card, test out. Simple. That was how she put it. And I thought, yeah, it's more complicated than that. There's some red tape, but it's really not that hard to jump through these hoops if you're determined to do it.
And it's a peace of mind to know you're on an airplane and everybody had to be tested. I'm glad they require that. I really am. So I'll just get back into this, but boy, it's nice to have that test done, and it's nice to get it in advance. And there's a lot of sources of information. You can go to your airline's website. I really just feel like hotels in big cities where there's a lot of people flying home, they know what's required. So that's all good. Hey, I'm going to just right now turn it over to you, Cameron, because I'd love to know about your experience as you show your slides and add to this sort of wisdom you've picked up just from the School of Hard Knocks.
Absolutely. I want to reiterate a couple of things before I start, because it's funny, you and I had different trips. When we came back, we didn't even have to compare notes because we had basically exactly the same experience. I think that's striking. We didn't have to kind of come to an agreement about what do we say about this, because we knew what to say about it because we actually went through it and it was very clear once you're there how it works. I think I was struck like you by how normal things were. Now it's a new normal. It's a normal that involves putting on a mask when you go inside, showing your CDC vaccination card. But it was really striking to me how normal things felt in Europe. And one thing I really appreciate, the word I think about a lot, is it's pragmatic. Europeans are very pragmatic. They're making small but significant, reasonable, common sense changes to the way that they live their lives to protect themselves and others. And it seems to be working pretty well. When I was there, I felt very safe and comfortable traveling in Europe. So I'd say you and I had very, very similar experiences.
And Cameron, there are people that since 9/11 have not traveled because they just don't want to put up with all of the inconveniences of high security at airports. I mean, it's like, well, all right. But I've got used to it, and it's the new normal from the age of terrorism, and we just step right over it. And now I think we're on a trajectory towards much, much greater normalcy. But even if this is the new normal, I've had 2 wonderful trips, and it's been a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But the reason I'm going is there, and it is pretty much COVID free. It's a beautiful experience if you can smartly take care of these little hurdles. Let's see some slides, Cameron.
All right, I'll dig right in. And as Rick mentioned, he and I were both going over at the end of August. This is my wife, Shauna. She joined me for the first couple of weeks of our trip. And then she went home and I stayed on for 2 weeks. We went over in late August, and it was kind of a scary time because, you know, Europe opened up to Americans in June. I started planning my trip in June. By August, the Delta rise in the United States was pretty alarming, and Europe was trying to figure out what they wanted to do about it. And I started to see a lot of headlines the week before we left using expressions like travel ban. Rick and I would call each other. Remember, Rick, you and I would call each other that week and say, "Are you still going?" "Yeah, I'm still going." "Are you still going?" "I guess I'm still going." And I guess the point is, it's always going to be changing. So first of all, if you're traveling these days, you have to be flexible. You have to be ready first to flex with what changes, but also be studying up on what changes. And also you have to think critically about the information you receive. As it turns out, what was actually happening in this case was the EU decided to take the United States off of their safe travel countries because of our spike in Delta. But that didn't necessarily mean that we were being sent home. This article literally came out the day I arrived in Europe, and no one met me at the airport and sent me back. It's just that different countries decided to have stricter regulations, and most of those were targeted at unvaccinated travelers. And since my wife and I were both vaccinated, it actually didn't affect us. So it's a scary time to make this decision. And I also want to say, you know, Rick and I are both very hardy travelers, and even for us, it was a kind of a scary time and not an easy decision to go. So if you're trying to debate whether to go, you're not alone in this. We're not trying to talk people into going to Europe. I think it's important to note a lot of people have good reasons for wanting to wait. Certainly if you're immunocompromised, or if you just aren't willing to grapple with the kind of the changeability of things right now. So it's not for everybody. But in our case, we were really glad that we went. We got on that plane, and I got to tell you, as soon as you got there, you get to Europe, you remember why it was worth all of the stress and all the extra preparation and all the tests that you took. We just had an absolutely wonderful time. When I was putting together my itinerary, I didn't realize it, but there's a word for the way that I was approaching my itinerary. One of my coworkers told me, "It sounds like you're going on a revenge travel trip." Rick, have you heard the expression revenge travel?
I had heard it, but I hadn't felt it until I got over there. Now I know what you're talking about.
It's a little hard to explain, but it's just this idea that we've had this pent up desire to travel. We have these things we want to do. And it's almost like, take that, COVID. We're going to do exactly what we want to do after not being able to do anything we wanted to do. So my wife and I really thought about, we don't want to do things because we feel like we have to go to this place or we're expected to go to this place. We said, what do we just want to do? Our favorite country is Slovenia. So our first stop was Slovenia. We wanted to reconnect with friends. We wanted to be in nature a lot. And so we designed kind of the dream itinerary. So I hope that for those of you who haven't been back to Europe yet, I'm sure you're in that position right now, thinking through what's your ideal itinerary, your revenge travel trip to kind of have your big comeback after COVID, or at least during late COVID. My wife and I touched down actually in Venice and drove up to the Slovenian Alps. And I got to say, when I saw that Slovenia sign, getting back to my favorite country, my heart leapt. And I said, "Shauna, pull over the car. I just need a picture of me just jumping for joy at being back in Slovenia." It just felt so great to be back there. So I want to say it's a little bit of a hassle. There's some anxiety around it, but once you get there, you just remember why you went to all that trouble. We spent our first couple of days, like Rick, high in the mountains, the Slovenian Alps, the Julian Alps. This was the view out our accommodations window when we woke up, our first morning back in Europe in 2 years. And it just did our soul so much good being back there. Had a great time in the mountains. And then we decided we were going to head into the Ljubljana, the capital of Slovenia, and we were going to be reconnecting with some old friends. This is Tina Heedy, one of our Rick Steves tour guides, and Bojan Kočar was a driver for Rick Steves tours for many, many years. He's retired now, but we're still in touch. Now, because I knew I was going to be seeing some friends, my wife and I were really glad. We brought some home test kits with us that we brought home from the US. And you can buy these in Europe as well. These are antigen tests, so they're kind of the speedy response tests. They're less reliable than the PCR test that they send out to a lab. But basically, they're designed to try to catch if you're currently contagious with COVID is really the idea of these tests. Takes about 15 minutes. You just swab your nose and you put a couple of drops in it. And then the test strip will flip and tell you whether you're positive or negative. And sure enough, I was negative. And that gave us, it's not a sure thing. If you want to be absolutely sure you're not carrying the virus, you need to get a PCR test and take it a little more seriously. But that really gave us sort of peace of mind that after being on the plane and traveling a lot, we were safe to go spend time with our friends. So that's, I think, a good sort of thing I never thought I'd bring with me to Europe, but I was really glad to have some rapid test kits. And I used them 2 or 3 other times as well, either because I was feeling run down or because, again, I'd been kind of exposed traveling a lot and I wanted to make sure before I saw friends. So that's something to consider stocking up on either here or in Europe. People are telling me in some countries of Europe, you can buy them very affordably in pharmacies. We went on into Ljubljana, the capital of Slovenia, which is one of certainly my favorite small city in Europe. And we just had a delightful time. Again, just sort of, I hope all of you, when you're thinking of where you want to go to Europe, picture that perfect European scene. For me, it was renting a top floor apartment overlooking the river and the rooftops of Ljubljana. And so we made it happen. Had a wonderful time exploring the city. Like Rick said, things are very normal. It felt like, the Slovenes were out and enjoying their city. We love sitting out at the riverfront cafes. It was a good chance to reconnect with friends. Here's Marian and Barbara. These are 2 more Rick Steves, husband and wife team of Rick Steves tour guides. And then again, it's sort of like going back after all of this time of COVID, we sort of had a bucket list of like, we want to do the things that we normally don't make time for. And so our friend Tina from Slovenia said, let me pick you up one day and I'll just take you to some of my favorite places. She didn't even tell us where we were going. And we just had the most amazing day. She took us to all these wonderful little hill towns and wineries, beautiful towns in this part of Slovenia that I'd driven through, but I'd never really spent any time in. It was just a total delight. She took us out for a beautiful hike overlooking a valley. And this was something that also reminded me, we really miss Europe and we miss Europeans, but the Europeans miss us too. And so it was really important for them to see us after all of this time. And that really did my heart good. This feeling of becoming reconnected with these people that we have not been able to connect with except virtually for so long. So for me, that was definitely the highlight of the trip. From there, we headed into Italy. And like I said, we kind of designed our itinerary to be in more remote areas. We kind of, partly for social distancing reasons, we wanted to be out in the countryside. So we went to our favorite part of Tuscany, and it allowed us to day trip into different hill towns and cities just to get a little taste and then head back to our countryside accommodations. And then we went to the Cinque Terre on the Italian Riviera. Again, a beautiful place just to be out in nature. And man, after being cooped up for 2 years, working from my dining room table for 1.5 years, where I'm sitting right now, man, to be able to go for a hike between the 5 towns of the Cinque Terre and come back down into Vernazza at sunset, that was just worth all of the endless months of monotony of being stuck at home. So it just really, again, did my heart good to be back there. As Rick was saying, I was really impressed with the pragmatic way that Europeans were handling the pandemic, especially in the places that I was in. Like I said earlier, people put on their mask when they go inside, they take it off when they come out. It's no big deal. There's not much fuss about it. One thing that I noticed that I thought was really kind of funny, this is a very distinctive European style. I wonder, Rick, if you noticed this in your travels. Did you see this?
Yes, I did.
I think this is very European. Europeans either put their masks on their wrists or kind of on their elbows.
Yeah.
And everywhere you go, and I've never seen that anywhere except Europe, but everywhere I went in Europe, that was sort of, I love these little European tidbits that you kind of pick up on when you travel.
I'm thankful that it doesn't have the political edge. It doesn't seem to have the political edge. As I mentioned, there are anti-vaxxers, but I felt like people appreciated the leadership their government was giving them in order to make everybody safer and their world more free flow.
And I'll use the word again, pragmatic. I think that I was so impressed with Europeans saying, you know what, we want to get back to normal. Yep. Let's look at the science. What are the steps we have to take to get us back to normal? Okay, let's take those steps. And that I really sensed that, a strong sense of that, at least in the countries that I went to. Another example was in the Cinque Terre in the little town of Vernazza. There's a little one-room grocery store. And I said, I'm going to stop by the grocery store and get some stuff for breakfast. And there was a line out front. And I realized, well, it's this tight little space. So what they were doing was they had, I think 2 or 3 parties were allowed in at one time. And one person from the party was allowed in. So I saw a lot of girlfriends in the window knocking and saying, don't forget the apricots, while their boyfriend was going in and doing the shopping. It was kind of cute. And I thought there again, it took me an extra 10 minutes to wait in line, but it seemed very reasonable for the small space. I will say this isn't common. I didn't see this in other places. I just think they were being really careful in this small town, in this very small space, to make sure that people weren't being unduly exposed. The other thing I saw everywhere in Europe, and this was kind of new, is hand sanitizer. I have European friends who would come to the Rick Steves tour reunion in January, and they would stock up. They would take home big bottles of hand sanitizer because for years you couldn't really find it in Europe. Now hand sanitizer is every bit as common in Europe at the entrance to every store, every museum, just like it is here. So that's in ready supply. You know, you see all these signs about what the different COVID policies are. They're basically the same policies that we have here. I think this was really important a year ago. By this point, I think people kind of understand. You notice some of the signs are getting a little tattered. You know, people kind of know the drill. One thing though that people do take seriously, this is what Rick was mentioning. It's called the Green Pass. This is a Europe-wide system for making sure we know who's been vaccinated, and each European has their own individual QR code. As Rick said, I had the exact same experience. I didn't try to get one of these QR codes, and I didn't need one. Everywhere I went that required them, I just had to show my US CDC vaccination card, and it was no problem. I actually experimented on this in Berlin at the end of my trip. I went into a pharmacy and showed him my CDC card and said, am I eligible to get a German or a European QR code for the Green Pass? And they said, no, you're not actually able to get it. At least that person told me that, because we've been told by the authorities, all you need is your CDC card. And again, you just show this. For example, we went into restaurants, I think only a couple of times where we ate inside, and they check your CDC card as soon as you sit down. And once they've checked it, that's it. It's no fuss, no muss, very easy. And it's not like a guarantee, of course. It really does buy you peace of mind knowing that everybody in the room with you is also vaccinated. For me, at least, that bought me some relief. I felt a little more comfortable taking the mask off to eat. But the great thing about Italy is, especially in September, you can eat outside almost every meal. And like Rick said, I think even in the winter, Europeans are really good at living outside, and even more so now. So if you're going to Europe, especially maybe next spring when it's warming up a little bit, you might not have to go inside very much if you want to be extra careful. It's a great place for that. Now from there, we went to the city of Modena, which is in the region of Emilia-Romagna, right in the center of Italy, very famous for its delicious food. And this was another theme of my travels, and I think it's going to be a theme going forward for me, which is I wanted to go to old favorites. I also wanted to go to new places. When you're daydreaming about traveling back in Europe, I think for you, Rick, maybe the Mont Blanc thing was a little bit like that. Yep. You want to go back to your old favorites, but you also think this is my chance to finally add to my list of the places I've been. And so my wife and I spent a couple nights here in Modena. We had a wonderful time. We absolutely loved it. She actually flew home from here, and I stayed on then for the rest of the trip. And we just had a great time exploring Modena. And then almost subconsciously, this was a theme of the rest of my time in Italy. I went to several other towns and cities. I had a car, so I would stop off for a few hours, or I'd spend the night. Places I'd never heard of before that my Italian friends told me to check out, like Bassano del Grappa, Trento. I went to this beautiful town called Treviso. I decided to spend the night here because my flight to Prague left from here. I never would have probably thought to go to Treviso otherwise. And while I was there, I said, why don't I just stay for 2 nights and check it out? Treviso is about a half hour from Venice. And a lot of people actually home base here and go into Venice for the day. And I thought I might do that too. But once I got to Treviso, I said, why would I go to Venice? This is just this wonderful little undiscovered corner of Europe. And I really enjoyed just being somewhere new. And then I'd say the reason why you might especially want to think about this for next year, a lot of my European friends in very crowded places like the Cinque Terre or like Prague, where I'll be going in a moment, they said they're kind of concerned because it's been nice and quiet for the last couple of years, but they think next year, especially if things go well, it could be extremely crowded. And they're not really up at capacity yet. So it's going to be a tough year maybe for crowds. And so I'd say, for me anyway, if I'm thinking about my itinerary, I'm going to mix in a few smaller, lesser known places and make some new discoveries. So just philosophically, that's kind of how I'm looking at 2022. The grand finale of the Italy part of my trip, like Rick, I felt drawn to the Alps. It's interesting, Rick, that you and I were both drawn to the mountains. I went and stayed in the town of Castelruth, or Castelrotto in Italian, up in the Italian Alps, in the Dolomites. And I had 2 glorious days of hiking the trails of the Dolomites. And man, again, after being stuck at my dining room table for a year and a half, this was just, it was worth every bit of stress and difficulty that it took to get over to Europe. It just felt so wonderful to be back. So I just hope for all of you that when you finally get back to Europe, you have that same experience. From here, I traveled on to a couple other countries, which means it's time to put my mask on again. In this case, I flew to Prague. And as I mentioned earlier, each country has different restrictions about whether you need to test or fill out other paperwork. In this case, I didn't need to test to go to Prague. However, and that might have changed, by the way, this is why Rick is saying you should really check a few days before you have to make that connection to see if anything's changed. I was checking basically every day, starting 4 or 5 days out, just to make sure. But one thing that is also very common is you have to fill out what's called a passenger locator form. And this is just kind of a tedious bureaucratic exercise. I spent about 10 excruciating minutes in my hotel room filling out this form to go into the Czech Republic. And I was really glad that I did. They sent me this QR code, and I had done one for Italy when I first arrived. No one ever looked at it. But when I got to the Prague airport, they did ask me for my Czech locator form. So I was glad I'd taken the time to do it ahead of time. And I was glad I had done my homework to know that I needed to do it ahead of time.
And
Rick, did you run into that? Yeah.
Yeah, I took that. I just was sloppy in that regard. I heard that this was required, but I had gotten through one flight without it when people said you should have it. And I thought, well, I'll just see what happens. And I got up to check onto my airplane. I think it was from Rome to Athens, and he wanted the passenger locator form, and I hadn't done it. So he cut me no slack. He just said, go over there and do it. And then he dealt with everybody else. And I'm really slow standing there with my luggage at the check-in line at the airport, trying to get online. And it was very stressful. I did it, but it was a lesson for me. It would have been much less stressful had I diligently done that a couple of days before from my hotel, rather than at the airport when my flight's taking off in an hour. So be sure you know about that passenger locator form. That was the biggest stress point for me out of all this COVID-related travel stuff.
Yep, that's where you have to do your homework, and you have to jump through a few hoops. But again, it's 10 minutes of filling out a form. It wasn't that big of a deal.
Oh yeah.
And then once I got to the airport, I just showed the guy the form. I was a little worried about crossing internal borders in Europe. You might be wondering about this. I thought there could be some headaches and some red tape, at least for my trip where I was going. It was very simple. I walked off the plane, and within 10 minutes, I'd shown my passenger locator form and my passport, and I grabbed my bag, and I was in an Uber going to downtown Prague. So, there might be some complexities here and there, but traveling around within Europe to me was pretty close to normal. So this is where I had a few wonderful days in Prague. There again, I just loved reconnecting with old friends. This is Jana Hrankova, who leads some of our tours for Rick Steves. And there on the end is Honza, who's the co-author of our Prague guidebook. So everywhere I went, it was just wonderful to kind of connect this trail of breadcrumbs of wonderful people that we know across Europe. I also love the sort of sarcastic, the Czechs have this sort of dark sense of humor. And I noticed there was this fancy cake shop where they have these delicately, very intricately designed cakes. And they actually had a cake that was shaped like the coronavirus. And then they had an antidote, a cake shaped like the vaccine, which I thought really showed off kind of the Czech sensibility. One thing, as Rick mentioned, when you showed that video, for example, of the going to the Pantheon, Rick, it's less crowded. I wouldn't say people might think, but well, if you go at this time of year, it could be really empty. You could have it to yourself. I wouldn't say it's uncrowded, but it's certainly less crowded. The thing I did notice, for example, on the Charles Bridge in Prague, and I walked across this bridge many times when it's just clogged with people, and everybody you hear is speaking English or another non-Czech language. Today, this was a beautiful Sunday afternoon. The bridge was sort of half full, and almost everybody I overheard was a Czech, and I thought that was really wonderful. And there's this sense that Europeans have sort of reclaimed some of their places, especially in these really popular destinations. And I think there's actually a little anxiety about when the crowds come back next year, how are we going to rebalance that? So just as a traveler, it's good to keep in mind traveling to places in a way that minimize that impact, and are kind of conscientious of the fact that the Czechs have loved hanging out in Prague. They know it's not going to last forever, but who knows, they might decide to stick around. I also went up to the Prague Castle. I didn't go into any of the museums inside, but I just thought I'd like to see the Prague Castle when it's not crowded. And if you've been to Prague Castle on a Sunday in September, I mean, you'll never see it this uncrowded again. It was just really interesting to be in these places when they just weren't that busy. I would say in general, I want to make a point here that when I was in Prague, I was a little surprised that masking compliance was a little bit lower than what I had observed in places like Italy and then later in Germany. And I want to make a point that Europe is not monolithic. Each country has its own regulations and its own kind of philosophy about how seriously they take things. So when I was in Prague, I really noticed, having been in Italy, where you check your vaccine card everywhere you go, I was surprised. I went to a lot of restaurants or bars or cafes, and no one ever checked a vaccine card. And a lot of people just were a little bit looser with their mask wearing. So just be aware that there's some differences across Europe. It's easy for Rick and I to kind of say, oh, it's all great all across Europe. But there are some differences. And like Rick mentioned, when my wife and I were in Modena, we did see an anti-vax protest in Italy, which is a very pro-vax, pro kind of science country. These people are saying they're not necessarily anti-vax, they're just anti-having to prove that you're vaccinated. But it's interesting to kind of see, like different parts of the US handling this differently, different parts of Europe are handling this differently as well. My last stop was Berlin. It was great just to be back in one of my favorite big cities. Again, got to reconnect with some friends. Beautiful late summer day in Berlin. One thing about being in Germany is you know exactly what's expected of you. You have very clear regulations and restrictions that are very carefully outlined, which I actually appreciate. Here again, this is sort of a philosophical thing. I always try to travel as a conscientious guest. I want to be a good guest, especially in times of COVID. I know they're kind of taking a chance by letting me in. And so I want to be particularly mindful to kind of follow local regulations. And in Germany, you really know what the local regulations are. There's no mistaking it. And they were very specific in their information here. For example, don't just wear a mask, but please cover your mouth and your nose with your mask. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to talk a little bit about different kinds of masks, Rick, if you don't mind, because I think this is something that in the US, there's masks and then there's not masks. But in a lot of parts of Europe, they're very specific. Here's a sign that says, from here, you have to wear a FFP2 mask. And I'm going to briefly stop my share so I can show some visual aids. It sounds confusing, but basically what it means is in Europe, most of Europe, depends on the country, a cloth mask isn't really good enough. If you're wearing a cloth mask on the subway in Berlin, they might say that doesn't count. You have to do better. They call it an FFP2 mask. Basically, it just means a medical grade mask. It's the same basically as our KN95. This is what I wear most of the time. Or our N95. This is what I wear on airplanes. And Rick, you've got a, what is that one called again?
Well, it's a KF94. And yeah. But I think these are all variations on the same theme.
These are all fine because they're medical grade. And someone asked me, does it have to say FFP2 on the mask? No one's checking to make sure it's a German made mask. They just want to see that you have a medical mask as opposed to a cloth mask.
But you can order a 10-pack of these very easily online. And it's just, I like to bring it with me and just, change it out. And I've got that because you want to have good quality mask for sure.
Yeah. And then they also tend to accept surgical masks. So I don't know if this is technically an FFP2, but you'll see Europeans wearing surgical and medical masks. But if you are going to Europe, don't count on bringing only a cloth mask because you might have to go to a pharmacy and get some real masks.
And there's full size and small size also that you might want to choose. All right.
I'll just wrap up really quickly here, Rick. I have one more thing to talk about in Berlin. So that's the mask. The other thing I thought was really interesting, and Rick alluded to this earlier, is the availability of testing in different parts of Europe. Germany is really on top of this. This is a kostenloser Bürgertest, which is literally a free test for citizens is basically what it means. Germany is subsidizing free COVID tests for their populace. You get a certain number per week or per month. A lot of other countries are doing this too. And not only is it free for citizens, but you see in this ad, you get a free FFP2 mask and a free bottle of hand sanitizer at the same time. Europe is really heavily taking advantage of this testing culture. There's pop-up testing centers all over the place. In Berlin in particular, this is literally a sea barge that has a testing center that's just sort of a pop-up thing. And I will say Europeans are using this in a really strategic way. For example, I have a lot of friends in Prague who have kids who were too young to be vaccinated. And they told me, well, if I want to take my kids to the swimming pool or to the hockey rink or to the movies, I just go by the free testing center. I make a little extra time, have them do the quick swab test, and in 15 minutes we get the negative, and then I can take them and do that activity without having to worry about it. So Europeans are really making, in a lot of countries, making testing very affordable and very readily available. This is where I did my test to get home. Rick was talking about how he went to a place that his hotel told him about. This was 2 blocks from my apartment in Berlin, and it took me 15 minutes. They emailed me the results. I showed it the next day when I checked in for my flight, and it was really easy to get home and take care of it. Overall, I came home really feeling great, really being glad. For me personally, taking the risk was worth it to have this wonderful experience in Europe. Again, I know that it's not for everybody. Not everyone would make that decision. I would also say it gave me a lot of confidence for 2022. We all know, if we've been watching the news, that Europe is having a winter surge. This is not a big surprise. We kind of saw this coming. A lot of my European friends, when I was there, said, people go inside this winter, we're expecting rates to go up a little bit. So if you're thinking about going in 2022 and then you see that there's a surge going on right now, I wouldn't say that those rule each other out. This is sort of something that they're taking in stride. My sense, and I wonder if you had the same sense, Rick, traveling in Europe, it was almost like this was a test run for 2022. You and I, being on the early wave this fall, were sort of guinea pigs, and they were kind of getting the hiccups out of the system. with the intention that next year they'll kind of know, it'll all be kind of a finely tuned machine and they'll know how it's going to work. So hopefully for 2022, things will be very smooth. What was your impression of that, Rick?
Oh, thank you, Cameron. And I just wrote that down right here. It's transitional. We're going over there in the beginning of this. Tourism is a huge part of the economy. You can bet they're going to be all hands on deck. They're going to get a lot of hard direction from the top down from the government. And this is just, it's a work in progress. And I think it's just going to get more efficient and better. So yeah, I think we had that chance to be early birds over there. And it really was interesting to see how Europe is handling this. And when you boil it right down, I think there's three things. There's your proof of vaccination, there's your negative test when necessary, and then there's your passenger locator form as required for airplanes. That's all the bureaucracy there is. And if you have that, just go over there and do what's comfortable for you. And I think it's no more complicated than traveling in the United States. Cameron, thank you so much. I do want to remind people, Cameron, you are such a prolific traveler and great teacher and writer. You've been busy during COVID writing a book. It's coming out just briefly. We're going to have it available on our website before it's out in the bookstores. Tell us about your book.
Yeah, last winter when we were all stuck at home and couldn't travel, I took a few months off and I wrote, it's sort of a travel memoir about the 20 plus years I've been working with you, Rick, and all the wonderful people we get to work with through Rick Steves Europe. So it's sort of a collection of my favorite travel tales and also some inside look chapters where we talk about what it's like to write a guidebook, what it's like to be a tour guide, what it's like to make travel television. You and I worked together on a few TV episodes. So I'm really excited. That's coming out. Officially, it's coming out February 1st, but we're going to do a pre-sale on ricksteves.com starting in about a month if you want to get a stocking stuffer for the travel fan in your life.
I got to read it. It's great. I'm so excited about it. So, and congratulations on that. And, you know, it just occurred to me, we should have a special Monday Night Travel episode to celebrate that early next year when we get it out. So let's put that
That'd be great.
on
I should
our
say
list.
the name of the book is The Temporary European. I always forget to say the name of it, but it's called The Temporary European.
The Temporary European. Great, Cameron. Hey, I'm going to jump in here and go down a few more slides. But one thing I want to talk about is this CDC card is a critical document. And I feel like I need a backup or something like that. You've got a good system where you get a photocopy and you get it plasticized.
Yeah, so I keep my original in, I don't have it right here, but I have my original in a little, here, it's with my passport. I put my original in this plastic sleeve and keep it in my money belt, so I know it's safe. But I took my original to a copy shop and I just said, give me a full color photocopy front and back and laminate it. And this is what I carry in my wallet. So if I were to lose this, I still have the original in my passport.
And while it is possible to ask your provider to give you a second backup copy of this original, if you get a quality photocopy of it, that's just as good. I can't imagine somebody looking at that and saying, no, I want to see the original, but it's
never
just
been a
good to have
problem.
it. Yeah. Hey, thanks, Cameron. I'm going to jump right into some, I do want to remind people we have Q&A coming up in 15 minutes or something. So if you have any questions, put them into the Q&A widget there and Lisa and Julianne will help us sort through those. And right now, before I show the slides of taking you on a couple of video clips, this is at a rest stop at an Italian freeway where you just stop and you get your lunch or your coffee and so on. And I wanted to show you an innovation that is just, to me, emblematic of what's going on in Europe for hygiene. This is a new way to check out without touching anything. Hey, I'm Rick Steves. I'm in an Italian autostrada stop, a rest stop. I'm with Ben Cameron, our guide, Ben. And this is COVID time, so of course we're traveling in Europe, but we're going with all the precautions as we want to do. And there's this new touch-free way to check out. We just bought something. Ben's going to get some water. Ben, show us what we do.
All right.
Touch.
Goes to English.
Into the market. Got your water.
Scan it. There
Just
we
scan
go.
it like that. And it tells you continue. Finish and pay. I could figure this out. And then you put your credit card in when it tells you it's $1.98. You paid $1.98 for your big bottle of water. That's about $2.50. You got your receipt and you are free to go, sir.
Yum.
Buon appetito.
My thirst is quenched.
All right. We're traveling and this whole pandemic situation is going to be something we learn to live with, and we'll take away some improvements. That is pretty slick as we enjoy a rest stop in Italy. And I actually like that because you can spend a lot of time at a rest stop waiting for the one lady at the cashier there to deal with everybody. And there you just kind of bam, 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 and you're on your way. Here's another example of what Italy and Europe is doing in general to make things safer for us when we travel. This is going into a mall, and I'm with 20 of our guides on our guides mentoring tour. And we're taking a night tour of Rome. We want to walk into this mall and they take everybody's temperature. So here's all of our new guides getting their temperature taken. I'm Rick Steves. I'm in Rome and we are traveling and we've got our masks and we get our temperature taken, but we're traveling and Rome feels great. How could such highly... All right, so now I'm going to take you on my second trip. I had 2 trips this fall, and this next one is, we did an amazing fun thing. I wanted to take our 22 newest guides actually on a tour so I could teach them how to be a good Rick Steves guide. And most of them are already professional guides, they're already great guides, but I wanted them to know what distinguishes a Rick Steves tour. So we've got, we've got like 30,000 people signed up for tours next year. We're going to ramp up and we're going to do these tours come March next year. And these are guides that we had a chance to do one of our tours with, our Heart of Italy tour. And they were on the bus. And 3 of us from the office, me, Ben, and Tara, got to be the teachers. And these are our new guides. And we just had a great time. And it was a it was a twofer. We were helping our guides know how to be Rick Steves guides, but we were also doing a tour during the pandemic to see what it was like. And this was very helpful for us. And we've got our buses and we're already social distancing on our buses because we have 50-seat buses and 25 people on our tours. So everybody gets their own couple of seats. In a situation like this, I would imagine everybody's just going to be wearing their mask on the bus. When you travel in Europe, when you go indoors, you generally are masked these days. This is another example. You go into a coffee shop in Florence and you just do the little checkout you pay for your whatever without having to touch anything. We had just a beautiful time on the road. And one of the happy news bits for me was to visit the hoteliers and the restaurateurs that we've worked with for 20 years and to find out that they're still standing. I was very concerned that 2 years of COVID would finish a lot of small businesses because it's been tough. But this is Anna Marie, and she runs our favorite hotel in Rome, Hotel Aberdeen, where our groups stay. And through government subsidies and through local patronage, these hotels and restaurants have made it through the pandemic. Cameron and I are going to Europe in the spring with all of our researchers and co-authors, and it's going to be all hands on deck as we update our guidebooks. We've got 50-some guidebooks covering all of Europe. I expected there'd be a lot of casualties because of the pandemic, but we've traveled enough now. And I don't know about you, Cameron, but I found that all the little restaurants and hotels were still in business and they were like feistier than ever to get through this thing and get back to normal.
I found the same thing. I was very nervous for a lot of my friends who run hotels, restaurants. I was surprised how few of them have gone away. They've really toughed it out. A lot of them have changed their business strategy. A lot of them have, built a new patio for dining, or they've done renovations. That was a big theme. While we were closed, we decided to finally do that long-awaited renovation. So things are different, but the places we love are mostly still there.
In fact, I found several people that just say, we're not going to let this whole COVID time go to waste. Whether it's a museum, whether it's a hotel, a guest house, a restaurant, a cafe, they were investing in that and they're really better than ever. Here's another example of how one of the hotels would have breakfast in a COVID-friendly way. You don't pour the cereal, it's already poured and it's in a little very safe plastic container. This is Mickey, who runs a wonderful little restaurant I like next to the Pantheon in Rome, and he has survived very well, and as have our other friends. So I'm happy about that. This is Ben Cameron. He leads our tour department in a lot of ways, and I just enjoyed being with our new guides, running around and just sort of making sure we know what it's like to do a tour during this pandemic time, and also to make sure our guides know how to do a Rick Steves tour. I was sitting in Florence having lunch, and I just was fascinated by the way the staff there diligently checked everybody's QR codes to get in. I'm just sitting at the table, and I'm glad because I'm inside. They don't let anybody in without wearing a mask and without showing that they have been vaccinated. Again, if you're a European, you'd have the QR code. If you're an American, you simply flash your physical CDC card that shows that you're vaccinated. At the Vatican, the guard is guarded against COVID with a mask. And when you go into the Vatican, you'll find it's just a beautiful experience without anywhere near the amount of crowds you're accustomed to. But if you're a pilgrim and you want to kiss St. Peter's toe, that's not allowed. There's certain things that obviously are no longer considered hygienic. And as long as this pandemic goes, you won't be able to do some of those rituals. Here you can see his toe just worn down to nothing after centuries of pilgrims have come and kissed and rubbed that toe. Of course, there'd be cords off that keeps people away from that now because they are concerned about people's safety and their health. And when you go into the Vatican, you've got your security and you also have your COVID security. So you get your bag checked and you'll get your CDC card checked. And then you get inside and you find, whoa, I've never been in the Vatican in my memory without massive crowds. And here we have the long corridors of the Vatican Museum, unusually uncrowded. The Sistine Chapel, hey, it's not very crowded. It's not like put on your shoulder pads. We're going to go into a mosh pit anymore. That won't last for long. But right now, there's some less crowded opportunities when you travel. Oh, it was so much fun to go to the Italian Riviera and to check in with our restaurateurs and see that they're still serving great seafood. After our tour experience with our new guides, I met Simon and Carl, and we're working on a 6-hour series, 6 one-hour shows, taking us on a sweep through the story of European art. We went to Florence for 4 days, Rome for 4 days, and Athens for 4 days, filming there. And from a filming point of view, there was no impact by COVID on us other than we had to wait sometimes because we didn't want to show people wearing masks because we're convinced that by the time this show gets out a year from now, masks will no longer be required. But again, I spent a lot of time in museums, and when you're in a museum now, you will be wearing your mask. This is just a shot I took in Rome after dark on the streets, reminding you the magic, the passeggiato, the strolling, the gelato, all of that romantic ambience on the street in Rome. It's still there. It's there just like before if you want to just go diligently through the few hoops to get over to Europe and travel during this period. But I was very thankful for how Europe is accommodating this. Once again, you got your COVID card handy to show that you've had your vaccination. You can have it on your phone if you like, but keep that original somewhere with you. We flew to Athens, and in Greece, like anywhere, they've got their attempts to keep people separated. And you can't. They're not going to pack so many people into the museums these days. You're going to find that more and more museums are requiring reservations. As a matter of fact, anywhere in Europe, when you go on public transit, you will be expected to wear your mask. And that's something Europeans do without a chip on their shoulder. They're thankful. It's the neighborly thing to do. I think Europe is a little better at that because they're used to living in a denser crowd situation. It's Rousseau's social contract. You all give up a little so you can live peaceably and in a neighborly way together. I noticed that tours are starting to come back. I'm not quite ready to have our tours going yet. We're going to be doing our tours starting in March. But there was cruise groups coming into the Acropolis here, and they were having a great time. And again, we enjoyed our restaurants that are doing very well. And even in the shadow of the Acropolis, we were just having a wonderful time. At my restaurant in Athens, there's another way they work to make things hygienic. This was new for me. Little plastic mittens that you wear when you're going through the buffet so you can put your breakfast together without risking anybody else's health. So that's, this is the place just 2 blocks from my hotel in Athens. And I just was so impressed by the professionalism and the service and the efficiency of getting your test done. As Cameron said, all over Europe, you will find small shops that do this, and they do it in a professional way. And then you get your assurance that you are negative. Again, don't go to the airport and expect to do it there. You can, but if there's any little glitch, if you got a false positive, or if there's a long line or some misunderstanding, you've got unnecessary stress. Get it done a day or two in advance within an easy walk from your hotel. And then I like to get a printout, have it on your phone or whatever, but then you go out to the airport and you're just great to get onto that airplane and have a relaxing flight home. That is about what Cameron and I have to offer. And
Rick, I had a question for you. You mentioned the 30,000 people we're hoping to take to Europe on tours next year, and you were doing this sort of test tour. And for example, people wearing masks on the bus. Have you decided yet exactly what we're going to be doing, or was the part of that tour to sort of figure that out?
Well, thank you, Cameron, for the question. We had two key players from our tour department with me on that 10-day Italy tour. That was our Heart of Italy tour. That was Rome, Volterra, my favorite hill town, the Cinque Terre, and Florence. It's a great core of Italy tour. And we are not committing ourselves to what level of safeguards we're going to have as our policy, because we don't know what the situation is going to be like next spring. We're hoping it'll get easier, but we're going to have the highest standards for health. But if it was what it is today, we could do it. And it would be, everybody's got to be vaccinated. It's up to you to get over to Europe, and you got to have your negative test. People wear masks when they're indoors, and we are a bubble. And if we're a bubble, everybody's vaccinated, everybody's wearing their masks. The standards are going to be set for us. You can't pack Anne Frank's house like you did in the past. They only let in so many people. You saw at the Pantheon, you can't pack the Pantheon. So we will be complying to the highest standards that will be dictated by Europe, so groups can travel safely in Europe. But I am really personally thankful that we have decided to require vaccinations for anybody that's going to lead, drive the bus, or take a Rick Steves tour next year.
Yeah, I am too, for what it counts.
Yeah, I think we're traveling on, and we're going to do it in a way that's not risky for our health. And as you said, for some people, they're just not comfortable with it, and I respect that. There's certain things I'm not comfortable doing that other people are comfortable doing. But I'm so glad that I've had this experience now. And I'm so glad that Europe is being really strong and bold in moving forward. And I do want to remind people, when you read the news, like that headline you showed earlier, the full thing was Americans not allowed in unless they're vaccinated. I mean, you hear things are spiking in Germany, but it's a pandemic within a pandemic. And what is spiking is that small community of people who refuse to take their shots. Those are the people that have the very high rates and the very dangerous rates going forward, I think. Is that your take on that?
And for a traveler, it's a practical matter. Being unvaccinated just makes life harder. We just saw, you and I were talking about this weekend, Austria announced they're doing a new lockdown that's targeted at unvaccinated citizens, because they've identified that, like I said earlier, pragmatic, right? They've identified that that's where the biggest risk is. So if you're not vaccinated, you have to stay home. If you're vaccinated, you can go out and mix. We might not like the idea of that in the US, but that's Europe's approach. So if you're traveling there, you kind of have to get with the program.
We would be doing people a disservice if we allowed them on the tour without those measures, because they're required in Europe anyways. Yep. Hey, I want to be sure we get to our questions. Julianne, do we have some questions?
We have loads of great questions tonight, but first, could we have a word from our sponsor?
Oh, a word from our sponsor. Thank you very much. Yes, we've just had our Christmas season shopping sale open up like we do every year at this time. And I want to remind people, everything in our travel store is discounted between 20 and 50%. And I happen to be with a posture right now, so I can show off my t-shirt. My Keep On Cameron, you might be wearing your t-shirt.
I've got one too. Yeah, I'll join you on this one.
Keep on traveling. So
Superman.
If you want to have your prestigious Keep On Traveling t-shirt, it's half price now. So that's something to look at. Also, our calendars are just out for 2022. And our staff does a great calendar. There's a wall hanging calendar, and there's also a day-by-day calendar. And these are, I think they're 30% off. They're quite deeply discounted, but we have every day a beautiful photograph, and then a fascinating little bit of information about that place as you can travel dream your way through 2022. So lots of stuff going on that way. I do want to remind people, next Monday, it is Ye Olde England. I can hardly wait to share that with you. And then 2 weeks from tonight, I'm going to just share what I did, not from a COVID or a pandemic point of view, but just give you more information about the experience I had this fall, hiking around Mount Blanc, and also doing the Heart of Italy tour with all those new guides and filming in Venice, Florence, and Rome. So I'm looking forward to sharing with all of you. Put that on your calendar. That will be 2 weeks from tonight, November 29th. Let's have some questions.
Great. Well, thankfully, both of you answered the most popular questions, which there are dozens of people asking the same thing. So thankfully, those were answered. And the first question is from Robert. And he's wondering, are Europeans still kissing on the cheek and shaking hands, or has that kind of been eliminated with COVID?
I didn't notice. I think it's kind of just like, I know when I go to church, it's interesting because you always have the passing of the peace and everybody's shaking hands. And now it's like you do this little dance where, are we going to do a fist bump? Are we going to do an elbow? Are we going to shake hands? Are we going to hug? It's kind of like whatever people are comfortable with. What do you think?
It's the same awkwardness that we have here. When we saw some friends in Ljubljana, Slovenia, I remember one of our friends kind of was holding back, and I went and gave her a hug, and she sort of said, "Oh, I guess we're hugging." Everyone's got their own, like here, everyone's got their own boundaries. I think we'll ease back into it, but for now, you just gotta kind of read people and back off if you need to.
And the nice thing is people they respect everybody's limits. So if you're going to be a fist bump, they're a fist bump. If you're going to be a cheek kiss, great. Okay.
Great. The next question comes from Bruce, and he's wondering, have prices increased because of COVID?
I was told by European friends in a lot of places they're going up. In some places they're going way up. Croatia, for some reason, people are telling me is far more expensive than it's ever been. Just like here, Europe is suffering with inflation, and COVID exacerbates that. Rick, I didn't notice exactly in my travels, but I kept hearing from Europeans that was a thing.
You know, it didn't occur to me. I didn't even think about it when I was over there. I'm not that tuned into it to know if it's gone up 5% or something, but I suppose they've had a lot of stimulation like we have, and they've flooded their system with money like we have. And I think and they've probably got demand things that drive it up. I think my concern is hotels are going to try to make up for lost revenue.
Yeah, exactly.
By overcharging. And I don't think that's good business, but they've got to make their own calls. But it's been tough because people have been having half the revenue they normally have. And when they do get back in the black, they're going to want to work really hard. One thing I'll tell you is Cameron and I are both going over with the rest of our crew, all of our researchers this spring. And it's all hands on deck, pedal to the metal, and every other way I can think of saying that, to get our guidebooks post-COVID and right up to date. So if things are going up in price, and there's going to be a lot of revenge travel, there's going to be a lot of people over there. So you'll have a lot of demand and a lot of crowds. You're going to want good information. And Cameron and I are going to work very hard. It's a high priority for us to get the Rick Steves family of guidebooks, more than 50 books covering all of Europe, honestly, post-COVID updated. But you know, when we made this plan, Cameron and I were assuming there'd be a lot of businesses that would have failed because of 2 years of COVID. And I don't know about you, Cameron, but everywhere I went, I didn't find any places that had died because of COVID. So we're not going to be raking a lot of corpses out of our guidebooks when it comes to little businesses that failed.
I found the same, and I was really happy about that. I was worried about people, and I found places survived. I did find a lot of places are changing their business model a little bit. They're adding a big outdoor patio. They use the time what they were closed to renovate. So I think things will be different, but I think most of our favorites have survived.
In fact, I heard of a lot of people in restaurants, hotels, and at the sites commenting that we didn't let this COVID time be wasted. They invested in their sites, in their museums. You go to the Uffizi Gallery now, you go to the Roman Forum now, you go to the Vatican now. It's really improved. They've invested in it while they had some downtime.
Wow. And you kind of touched on that a little bit earlier, Rick, but Mark was wondering, are there even more limitations on crowds in the popular sites, or more reservation systems in place?
Right now there are. Right now, and this is something that I'm sad about, is just because there's more hurdles to get into a site. More museums are requiring reservations, and more museums from a tour point of view are limiting how many people can go in at a time. So we'll be breaking our groups into smaller groups. It's going to be more costly for us because we'll have to have 2 guides instead of 1 to go into the Accademia or to go into the Uffizi. But we still want to see those great sites. And in some cases, they won't let groups in at all. So what we'll be doing as a tour company is getting the reservations and paying for the admissions and getting you oriented, and then turning you loose inside with the audio tours that Cameron and I have produced over the years. And that works really well for people. We were even testing that with our Italy group just a couple of weeks ago.
Great. And John was wondering, do you think that COVID has affected the ability for travelers to connect do people kind of seem closed off, or do they seem even more open-armed than in the past?
I mean, I think that I hit on that in my part of the talk. I felt people were so excited to see us. Some of the people I saw were literally just bursting with joy and news and wanting to reconnect. So I think, if there are silver linings to this pandemic, it's that people are craving that connection more than they ever have before. I found it even easier than ever to connect with people over there.
It's given us something in common. It's given us
Yes.
something in common. We've all gone through this, and we talk about it. And the Europeans had lockdowns like we can't imagine, and they're so thankful to be not locked down, and they're so respectful of the risk of this, and they're going to be very thankful to have the business come back.
And the probably most asked question was, what kind of masks can you wear? And Cameron, you guys did answer that question, but Cameron, you had the picture of someone wearing it around their arm. Viewers were saying New York, other places do that too, so it just hasn't caught on in Seattle. Because I
hadn't seen it before. Yeah. It was it seemed very Italian to me, but maybe it's not just Italian.
If your sister was sewing all these cute little masks at the beginning of COVID, hang them up somewhere, but you're not going to take that to Europe with you. You need to get the serious mask. And I was so impressed by how easy it is to get a 10-pack of these, do a little research, but get that, the ones that start with K, I guess, they are great, because you got to wear it all day long on an airplane. You go into the museum for 2 hours, you're going to wear this thing. But it's just part of your equipment now. And thank goodness when you sit down in a restaurant, whether you're indoors or outdoors, you take it off. But if you're enjoying a museum, it's like wearing a scarf, and the scarf covers your nose and your mouth.
Yep. And the last question for tonight is for both of you. Maybe Cameron, you can go first. And it's, what was your favorite thing about returning to Europe?
I mean, it was the people. It was reconnecting with friends. And that day I described where our friend Tina Heedy from Slovenia took us deep into the countryside, and she just wanted to show us not the big famous sites. She wanted to show us her favorite places. And some of them were places she discovered during the pandemic. She and her husband figured out this little hill town where they'd go and rent an apartment when they needed to get away from the kids for a couple of days, and the kids to the grandparents' house, and really try to escape the pandemic. And just having those personal connections and reconnecting with old friends for me was easily the best part.
Nice. I think one of my favorite things was being clumsy. I hadn't traveled for 2 years, and normally I've got it, I just bam, bam, bam. And I was like a beginner, and it was really fun to get back in the saddle, even though I was a little bit rickety on the saddle. And but really the great joy was connecting with all of our friends that are these entrepreneurs, all these mom and pop places, with their whole restaurant, their cafe, their little tour company, their guest house, their bed and breakfast, their hotel. It's a passion of theirs. It's their niche. It's what God put them on this planet to do. And they are still in business, and they're eager for us to come back. And I'm just thankful that we've got this experience. We're able to share it. We would never compromise anybody's health, none of our employers or none of our travelers, in order to get our business resurrected prematurely. We're going to be very conservative. I'm surprised there's people doing tours right now, because I certainly wouldn't. But for individuals traveling right now, I feel very comfortable with that. If you're willing to be realistic and take the proper precautions and be a good student of this. Cameron and I have both been steep on the learning curve, and we've spent an hour here sharing our lessons. And by early next year, I'm pretty darn confident that we will be able to do our tours the way we want to do our tours and give people a safe and efficient and smooth experience. So Cameron, thank you so much for sharing your experience. It's always nice to be able to partner with you in this mission that we have of helping people learn from our experience so they can travel smoother. And
thank you for having me. This was fun.
Good, Cameron, and congratulations on your book. I'm really excited to see that. It's just, I know it's been a enjoyable but a major project for you, and it's a beautiful thing to share that. And Julianne, thank you for moderating today, and thank you all for joining us. I want to remind you, every Monday night we keep on traveling right here. So happy travels. Thanks a lot.